We're back. Wine Wednesdays is back. Well, just a special episode, very special episode, because Viking is launching a service, fantastic cruise to Malta. So we thought we'd celebrate this with a special episode of Wine Wednesdays to talk about wines from Malta, which, with all due respect, are pretty unknown in America. And I don't think they're very well known in England either. Malta itself is very well known by the English, but not so well known in America. And I'm very excited to be here, and I can see that Dean at Tiverton and Mika in Montclair, United States, are both already commenting and asking and going to probably ask questions. And so feel free to ask questions throughout the show. We're going to start off with a little introductory video because we're going to have Jeremy Cassar join us later. And I think a little introduction to his winery will be fantastic. It's just celebrated 100 years of age. So we'll watch this video. It's a couple of minutes long, and then we'll come back to you.
The 100 years is what we're calling it, 100 years. Why? Because the story that we're celebrating is the story of 100 years. So we selected the wines which we thought were the best wines of 2017, and we said, let's see what sort of a blend we can make with these wines. To try and come out with the right style, the right character, but we wanted a wine that would last the test of time as well. We believe that the 100-year story is also impressive, and that has to carry through.
So I think that video gives you a nice little taste of Malta and a little taste of Marsovin. And if you stay to the end of this show, at the end of the show, we're going to show another video with some more lovely scenes of Malta, which are spectacular. Without further ado, let's introduce Jeremy Cassar, who is sitting in his cellar at Marsovin Winery, and you can see the racks of bottles. Those are riddling racks where they twist them the same way that you do in champagne to get the yeast into the neck of a bottle. So that's the fun. He's actually in the cellar, not sitting with a picture behind him. So let's introduce Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi. Thank you, Bartholomew. Yes, I am in the cellars. It is the best place to be in the hot weather we have at the moment in Malta. The summer is already is well set, and the temperatures are high. So we're down here in about 16 degrees, and this is where our wines get aged.
Well, one of the nice things about Malta is I thought that Malta, being in the middle of the Mediterranean, would be extremely hot, but your temperatures in the summer really go up to about 25, 26 degrees Celsius, which is about 78 Fahrenheit. So not too hot.
It's in June, it's like that, but then at times July and August can go up quite significantly. It also depends on the year. So
because Mika, in her comment online, asked me if we were experiencing the same heat wave. Yeah, it's about 100 degrees here today. It's hot and muggy and humid, but I imagine that you're fairly windswept and humidity isn't a problem.
At the moment, but then when it sets into the summer and we have southerly winds, then we tend to get a lot of humidity, and that doesn't feel too good, you know. They prefer the northerly winds, which are far more comfortable, especially when you're out at sea or you're working on the vineyards, which is hard work, as we know.
Yes, but nice dry work in the. I hear all of your rainfall is in the winter, and it's not a problem in the summer.
No, we rarely have rainfall. There tends to rain a little bit around mid-August, but very, very much less over recent years. And we tend to get some bad rainfall in September, which can be a bit problematic from time to time.
We're now watching a few. James, who's in the background doing the production of this, is going to show us some pictures, more pictures of Malta itself. This is, I guess, this is the capital of Malta, which is called.
This is called Valletta.
Valletta, and those are two interesting cathedrals, aren't they? The one must be a big Catholic type of, and the one looks more Anglican.
That's right. We've got one which is the Anglican cathedral, which is the big dome that you can see there, and then further in there's a St. John's Cathedral, which is the Catholic one. It's one of the biggest ones, actually, the Anglican cathedral. There are plenty of churches around Malta, and they say there are 365 odd churches to visit. So,
what is this we're looking at now?
That's the cathedral in Medina, which is the previous capital of Malta, called Medina, previously known as Medina, built by the Arabs a long time ago, and then restored by the Knights. It is a beautiful city. It's called the Silent City. Medina is a silent city. You can't beep your horns in there. You have to be quiet. It's a lovely place for a very relaxing.
That's marvelous.
To read a book and to have a quiet environment, and then it's a lovely place to visit.
You said 360 churches. How many people live in Malta?
In Malta, I think now we have about close to 500,000.
500,000. So it's
it's a small island, but it's I mean, it's quite a few people, but it's not jam-packed either. It's quite comfortable.
So you mentioned the Knights. I mean, you've had winemaking since Phoenician times, and then in 1530, I think the Knights of St. John came to Malta. And forgive me for my disrespect, but I think of when I hear the Knights of St. John, I think of the Monty Python Search of Holy Grail with people with coconuts trotting behind a knight who's walking. Tell us about the Knights of.
I think the Knights of St. John were probably a little more violent than the Monty Python ones, but they were rulers, and they were strong rulers. They did a lot of. They came from all over. They were previously in Rhodes, and they were kicked out of Rhodes by the Ottoman Empire, and then they came to Malta. It was the King of Spain that gave the island of Malta to the Knights of the Order of St. John, and they were there to rule it. And they arrived in 1535, and they left in 1798. So they were here for quite a long time, and they are responsible for all the beautiful fortifications, which are endless. To be honest, they did so much in that relatively short time. They practically built all the beautiful, most incredible fortifications, and Valletta is a reflection of what the Knights did over that period of time.
What was the what was the philosophy of the Knights of? Were they a religious group or?
They were a religious group, yeah, entirely religious and military, and they were hospitaliers. So they were known as the Knights of Hospitaliers. So they were medical as well. So their goal was to also to improve the medical facilities to quite a high standard. Back then, there was the first university in Europe was established. Medical university was established in Malta by the Knights.
Really?
A very long time ago in Valletta. It's not currently what is used, but it was a small one, but it was the first.
And the tradition of knights, I mean, I know that your father is a knight, and a friend of mine, Wayne James, who writes about finer things in life, he says he's a knight, so I have to call him Sir now, I suppose. But what is the tradition now for the Knights of St. John? How do you become a knight? Why does it still exist?
It still exists to maintain the tradition, and also it's we might ask, how was one selected? You were selected based on your contribution to the island and what you've achieved, and how you've helped make a difference. They also have a strong role in charity, so they help the poor, the sick, and they do a fair amount for that, and they keep the tradition moving on, and it's obviously a religious group as well, so that is a strong aspect of it.
Well, I know we'll talk more about that later, the Knights of St. John, because of your wine, which you celebrate every year with. So we'll get onto that later. But just back to the history of Malta, then I'm very sorry, but in about 1800, the British arrived and started planting cotton and ripping up your vines.
Yes, I think there possibly may have been too much wine at one point in time, but yeah, they did, and in fact there was quite a lot of trade going on with cotton, and they planted a lot of wheat because there was a lack of food as well in the island. So did
the British colonize it, or
the British colonized it? Yeah, absolutely.
And are they remembered as good people or bad people, us Brits?
A bit of both, I'd say. Certainly, there was actually a year when Napoleon was there in 1798. That's when he came. He spent a year, and Napoleon established the Napoleonic Code, the Civil Code. He did that in a short time. He also robbed Malta from all of that, a lot of its jewelry and its precious items.
So does your legal system now follow the British one or the Napoleonic one?
It's split. It depends which aspect of the law you're looking at, but there's a lot of it based on the British law as well.
When I was, the video which we showed earlier, the whole thing is 26 minutes long, and we can find it on your website. And I really recommend people watch it. I particularly enjoyed watching Antonin, your great grandfather, and I was fascinated by because he was speaking his language, and it was being subtitled in that part of the video. And I was fascinated by the language. I couldn't figure, it seemed like me somewhat Italian, but somewhat sort of Arabic. And what is your heritage in the language?
The language is it's spoken, it sounds like Arabic, but it's a very, let's say, a European version of Arabic, because it's got a lot of European words in it. So a lot of French, a lot of English, Italian. So it's a very modern version. And even it's actually odd because we're 95% Roman Catholic as a country. And then we've got this Arabic language, which sounds Arabic. It's actually quite soft, a very soft version of Arabic. So it doesn't sound as harsh and toned as Arabic is, but it's a much softer version. And it's got a lot of, like I said, a lot of Italian words in it, with Italian being quite influential in our culture as well, as a country. And obviously the French that were here for a while with the knights, a lot of the knights were French. So there's quite a mix in the language. So
culturally, do you relate more to the English, the French, the Arabs or the Italians or what?
Now, culturally, I think we have a split. I'd say there's a good influence of the culture. British is very strong because it's the most recent. Until 1964, we were a British colony, so not too long ago. And there was a very strong link between Malta and the UK, and there still is. However, as time goes by, when one looks at our food habits, we've certainly got very, very strong influences from Italy, which are growing and growing and growing ever more every year, and French as well. So I'd say our cuisine, there's the local cuisine, and then there are the restaurants, which you'll find Michelin star restaurants and plenty of very good restaurants, which have an influence of French cuisine and Italian. So it really depends on what you're looking at. Certainly, the difference, I suppose, between us and the rest of the Mediterranean is that Malta tends to have, because of the influence that the British left in Malta and the Knights and the French, the last batch of colonizers in Malta did a lot to build structure in the island and to give it a structure which was different to what you might find in Sicily or in Greece and other countries. There's a bit more structure over here. So it's a better potentially for doing business, and there's a lot. The healthcare is very good, and the legal system is not bad, and there's a lot of. It's quite developed in that aspect.
Was Malta hit badly by the COVID virus?
Malta it wasn't for most of the time, and then when the new variant came in February, then things started to get worse. But then we had an outstanding vaccine implementation plan. So we've already hit herd immunity from vaccination at the end of May. So we're well over 70% of the population have already been vaccinated twice.
That's fantastic. I'm in America, and unfortunately, we're aiming for 70% by the end of July, or by the 1st of July. I just don't think it's going to happen. We're about 67% now, which is very frustrating. Culturally, when I was on the last Viking cruise I went on, we stopped in Greece, which happened to be the first time I'd ever been to Greece. And I walked around. I went into a bar or a restaurant actually. And I was shocked by the fact that they were still allowed to smoke in restaurants. Is that the same in Malta, or do you have?
No, we don't. We have a very, I would say possibly overly strict attitudes towards the health and safety aspect in restaurants. And so, again, a lot of the influence comes from the UK, and I think they possibly overdo it sometimes, but. But better safe than sorry.
Okay, let's talk about your family. So it was your great grandfather Antonin, or Tonin as he was known by your family, who, aged 10, he was one of 6 children, and his father died, so he had to work, and he really started. He was very entrepreneurial. It sounded. Do you want to tell us a little bit?
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, I think these type of stories exist around the world. So for us, it's nice to tell ours. I got to know him quite well because he lived a long life to the age of 97. He was a very courageous, fearless person, and this is what his daughters always described him. So when he was starting out, he told his father, I want to go into business, and his father said, oh, it's easier if you just get a job. And he said, but I'm not that type, and I want to go do this, and I want to do that. And he started at the age of 10, selling peanuts and oranges on the side of the road to make some money. But eventually, at the age of 16, he would set up his business in the wine business. He started off in the first couple of years as a wine merchant, so he started distributing wine. Then he established his winery. Within a couple of years after that, eventually his brother George moved on and became a lawyer and did his own thing. And My great-grandfather, what we call in Maltese, our buzz nanno, that's what we call great-grandfather in Malta, carried on with the winery, had a large family of 8 children, as was the practice back then, have them by the dozen, so to speak. He was the only boy, incidentally, and it was tradition back then that in most cases the boys carried on with the business, not always. And he had his son Joseph carried it on after him. But one of the interesting things which I found about his story when he tells it is that he actually grew to become the largest wine distributor in the island during the Second World War, because his winery was based in the heart of Malta, in a place called Ormi, and the rest of the distributors and producers had their stores on the harbour. It was commonplace to have your stores in the harbour because of so many soldiers and so much traffic coming through the harbour. It was like the core and the heart of the island for trade and commerce. But that was heavily bombed, so they had to close down, and he carried on fearlessly driving around the island distributing. So he came out of the war the way that he describes it, as a much bigger winery than he started out in the war.
And he was importing wines from Spain and Italy.
Yeah, he would import wines from these regions too.
But so had he imported all of those wines before the war, and he just had big inventories, or did he continue managing to get wine in during the war?
No, he continued to get. He managed to get it.
How did he get it in if the port was bombed?
I don't know how he managed to get it in, but don't forget that the war went on for quite a long time, so it's quite probable that there was a period when it was inaccessible. But if he had enough even from local farmers to produce his own, because he was already a wine producer back then, so whatever he had is what he would have got in, and at any opportunity he would have got it in. It's only 50 nautical miles to Sicily, so it's not that far.
Right.
So it wasn't impossible to get anything across. And at the same time, there were a lot of producers locally that he was buying grapes from, Maltese grapes. So.
There's a wonderful book about your winery which I read, and I love the story of how he became respected, from being a 10-year-old kid who's selling wine to building a business during the war and coming out after the war, and how he became gradually respected by the other importers and eventually becoming the biggest importer. And it's a really well written story and really engaging story about him.
Yes, it's a nice. Well, he must have told it to me 100 times, and it always left its mark because of the way he said it and the way he described it firsthand. It was meant a lot to me. I think it was one of the reasons that drove me to carry on the tradition of the winery, because then my father stopped working when he was 55, so I started here about 20 years ago now.
So he started selling things when he was 10, but when he was 16, I think that was in 1918. That's when he actually started the wine business. Is that correct?
The official year was 1919, but when he was 16, he's actually started importing. And the company was of Anthony Cassar and Son, was established back then, so in 1919.
And then he handed over to his son Joe at a relatively young age, and I can't remember why he did that. But Joe had studied in Perugia and hired some people, Albert and Philip from Bordeaux in Germany.
Yeah, that's right. My great grandfather absolutely adored his son. He adored him, endlessly, and he trusted him a lot, and he believed in him a lot, and he wanted to give him the reins. So he had children quite young, So by the time the war had come along, it was, you know, already it was already, his son was already quite mature, and he believed in him. His son had also finished his schooling, which my great grandfather hadn't. So he was into sciences tremendously. So he was qualified as a chemist. So he automatically said, "Listen, if you're going to take it to the next level, you need to take over." And so it was an easy transition, not always necessarily the case between father and son, but in this, I know that the story between him and his son was Joe was a very strong sense of affection and love for him, and trust as well, obviously.
And then Joe handed over to his son Tony when Tony was in his 20s, and that's because Joe got into politics or something.
Joe, not into politics. He was appointed chairman of the Malta Development Corporation. So there was a business aspect that in government that would head the sort of relationship between incoming business to Malta and manufacturing and all business around the island. And it was generally somebody from the private sector that was appointed there. But he couldn't stay and do the two jobs at once. And my father was still very young, so he was about 21 when he had to do that. He was still very, very young, and was just getting married. So it was an early start for him, but he did it for his father as well, because my father wasn't initially planning to become a part of the winery. He was already in another business of his own. But he did it, and he obviously enjoyed it and did a lot of the winery, and obviously he left his mark.
Yeah, it was your father who brought in European varietals, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, because they started this together in the 1970s, where they did some planting of with an experimental vineyard that we have, where we started this in the 70s of trying different varieties. We started trying out Chenin Blanc and the Cabernet, and we produced our first Cabernet in 1974, which turned out very well, and we did a bit more of it.
So before that, you were growing the local
Gelosa, that's right. Tongue twister.
And the red.
The Girgan, yeah, it's a red. And we grew also the Girgentina, which is the white variety. And these are the two varieties which you'll find in Malta quite commonly.
And Generua is no longer.
No longer with us.
Some of my. It's very difficult to find anything about Malta, wines from Malta. In fact, I was looking in the seventh edition of Hugh Johnson and Jancis Robinson's World Atlas, and they didn't have anything about Malta. So I wrote to her, and she very kindly sent me a brilliant bit that's in her Oxford Companion to Wine, which talks about Malta. And but otherwise, it's hard to find anything. Andrew Jefford, a great wine writer, is married to someone from Malta. So I imagine he's probably written about wines from Malta, but there's not much to be found.
Okay. Yeah, well, we are a very small island, and we do produce normally just enough for what we drink and the tourists drink. So there isn't plenty of it available.
So do you export at all to England, say?
We do a little bit here and there. We do a bit. Bit to Poland, bit to the UK. Prior to Brexit and COVID, but a bit to France here and there as well. A bit to Italy occasionally. It comes and goes, a bit to Japan. It's a small part of what we do.
I don't think any wine from Malta is exported to the United States at the moment, if ever have.
I doubt there is much at all, in fact.
In fact, I was joking to the producers of Viking.TV, saying that I'm probably now the biggest expert on Maltese wines in America, which doesn't say very much because no one else knows anything about wines from Malta here. But it's kind of fun to learn. I've really enjoyed learning about your wines. So you took over, Jeremy. You took over when did you take over from Tony? What age were you?
I was. I joined at 25, and I took over from my dad 80 years ago. So that's in 2013.
There's a picture of the two of you. You look almost identical.
Yeah, that's what everybody says, and he's chuffed about it.
Yeah, there's no worries about where you came from, that's for sure.
Certainly my dad, yeah, that's right. It's your father's son, as it say.
Yeah. Now you have 5 properties, 5 wineries, or five properties.
That's right. Five estates which we own ourselves. We have a number which we manage ourselves as well. But the estates, the 5 of them belong to us. And each one is planted with a particular set of grape varieties for a particular wine. So we try and maintain this single vineyard concept, which then reflects on the style of the wine coming from a particular part of the island.
So which property are we looking at right now?
That is called it's a vineyard called the Cheval Franc Estate. It is a vineyard which is where my father lives. It's planted with Cabernet Franc, and it is got a little bit of Malbec, which we just planted recently, and it overlooks the St. Paul's Island, which is where.
Does it not have some Shiraz too, or Syrah?
Yes, it has a little bit of Shiraz, but a very small amount,
Okay.
about 1 to 2%. As time goes by, we had tried it out, but we found the Shiraz didn't work in that particular vineyard, so we're replacing it with Malbec. But it's a very small percentage. The wine
I'm a
itself
huge fan of Cabernet Franc wines. How would you describe your Cabernet Franc and compare it to regions, whether it be Virginia?
In our case, our Cabernet Franc is in that particular vineyard produces a Cabernet Franc which is stainless steel fermented. We don't barrel age it. We get is quite a nice peppery aroma. There's a green peppers, which is really quite significant and quite strong. We produce a medium-bodied wine, so we're not actually looking for that particular wine. We're not looking for huge, full-bodied wines. So generally varies between 12.5%, 13.5% alcohol, not more.
I love that.
Yeah, we do try to get as much varietal characteristic out from that particular wine.
So how many bricks, when you pick the wine, how many bricks are you picking to keep? And
we generally we try and aim for 24 if we can, but the Cabernet Franc doesn't go that high that easily in this particular vineyard. So we tend to stay around 22, 23. If I can get 23, normally we're quite happy.
And the green bell pepper is
a significant tasting note. Yeah, it's significant on the wine. So it's a nice full body, medium-bodied wine. We try to get soft tannins. We generally tend to get them. We've been producing it for quite a while now, and it's become one of those staple wines in Malta.
So one of the a lot of places like in Portugal, they all boast about their south-facing slopes, which get lots of sun, but you have a problem of maybe too much sun, so your better vineyard is north-facing, is that?
Yeah, obviously depending on the variety, we tend to go for north-facing when we're looking at the white varieties. When it comes to the reds, and south-facing is not too much of a problem. But if it's north-facing, as you said, it's always helps a bit more with the maturation, especially if you get any shocks of high temperatures in the summer, which some years can be extremely pleasant, and generally that's very pleasant. But if you get any shocks in it, it tends to allow you to get that cooler exposure.
Now this next vineyard is that the Gaju Rihanna estate?
It's called the Ain Rehana.
How do you pronounce it? Hein?
Ein Rehana.
But Hein, but it's spelled G-H-A-J-U.
Yes, that's G-H-A-J-N, and it's the GH is silent. So you have to. Ein
Rihanna.
Rehana. Yes, like imagine the Ein, one in German, Ein, that's how it is.
And Rihanna is spelled like the pop star.
Yes, right. Exactly.
And that is Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, right?
Yes, we've got a Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc. We've just added a small piece of land with some Malbec on it as well. So we like the character it gives. But it's you know, all the wines so far are 50-50 Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and a different clone to the previous vineyard. So we've got the French and the Italian clone, two different clones. Here we've got more of a full-bodied wine. It's very high density plantation, so 10,000 vines per hectare, whereas the other vineyards we have are at 6,000. And it produces an interesting character. It's one of the vineyards where we have the biggest difference in temperature between night and day. So it's actually the property where I have, that's my home, that's where I was brought up in. And at night, there are no air conditioners in the house. You don't need any ACs, whereas in other parts of the island you do. It gets so cool at night that you just a ceiling fan is fine. And whatever I feel, as you know, the vine feels as well. And that difference of 12, 13 degrees between day and night really makes a tremendous difference to the maturation of the wine. We end up harvesting first week of October, which is about almost 3 weeks later than any of the other vineyards.
And that's where you make the Grand Maître, which we'll talk about later, right?
Yes, that's right. That's exactly.
Is that the only wine you make there, or do you make other wines from that vineyard?
No, it's only a hectare, so it's the only wine.
Okay. Next, we're going to see, this is the Marnisi estate.
That's right. So Marnisi is a sub-region of a region in Malta called Marsa Schlock, which is a fishing town. And in that fishing town, there's a place called Marnisi. Further down the road, there's also a palace called the Palazzo Marnisi. It was owned by a noble person in Malta. And we have a vineyard in that region. It's planted with 4 varieties. Malbec, which is the smaller quantity, about 5%. And then there's Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot.
So classic Bordeaux varietals.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have on the other side of the road and separately a little bit of Chenin Blanc, which we're very happy with the results on. So it's not exactly attached to the vineyard, but it's across the road. As you can see, a road initially in the picture.
Did you know that it's Chenin Blanc month this week? This month.
I didn't actually.
Week. This week is.
Yeah. Okay, I'll have to have a bottle on the weekend.
Yes.
So we've got a bit of Chenin Blanc there, which does very well. We produce two red wines from that vineyard, one which is predominantly Cabernet based, and the other one which is predominantly Merlot based. We've previously started off the vineyard with a bit of Petit Verdot, which had 5% of the blend. We didn't do too well in Malta, and we've replaced that now many years later with a bit of Malbec, which we've tried already 10 years ago. We've been tried in the experimental vineyard, and it does very well locally. So we're looking at to give the role of the Petit Verdot to Malbec instead, as to add a bit more complexity to the wines.
And the wines, the resulting alcohol level in those wines are again 12-13%.
No, there we go up a bit because the Merlot loves Malta. There's a red variety. I'd say it's probably one of the best matches to Malta, and I'd say Malbec is pretty similar in that way. So we do go up to 14, but we tend to stay around 13.5.
Do you bottle any of those as single varietals, or are they all blended?
There are 2 wines. So there's a wine called Antonine, another wine called Marnisi, which is the name of the region, and they're both blends. They're both blends.
How would you describe your style? Would you say that the Bordeaux blend is a classic Bordeaux style wine, or more New World style, or?
No, I'd say it's a classic Bordeaux style. That's what I would say. It's coming from the influence of the winemakers of the last 30 odd years. That we had my father's brother Albert, who was studied in Bordeaux, and so did we have another person who was employed with us and who we sponsored the studies. Also studied at the university in École d'Onologie de Bordeaux, and they have they brought back that experience and that kind of influence into our wines, and we also tend to have quite a lot of respect for that style. Fairly classical in the approach of the winemaking, and we use mostly 95% of the oak is French. So they're both blends. What I think that those wines are characterized by the soil is a terra rossa soil. And we find that part of the island tends to give this earthiness to the wine. And so we've got this earthiness coming through from the character of the soil, because Cabernet and other parts of the island is a different style. It's actually so interesting that Malta is so tiny, but there are so many different styles which we notice of Cabernets and Merlots that from different vineyards give something totally different.
Yeah, and Malta is basically comprised of two major islands.
That's right.
One bigger than the other, and you have wineries on both islands.
We have vineyards on both. We have one winery which is where I am at the moment. We'll be building another small boutique winery in Marnese, and possibly in the future a very small winery for white wine in our sister island in Gozo. We have a pretty vineyard just not too far away from the beach. That's it. It's 200 meters down the road. There's a beautiful red beach with red sand, and in Maltese it's known as a Ramla in Hamra, and you can literally go by boat, and come on the beach and walk to the vineyard.
Ramla, and sorry, that one was that one the word? How do you say it? Wardija?
That one was the one in Gozo, the one we just saw.
Ramla.
Ramla. That's planted with Chardonnay. 95% Chardonnay, 5% Pinot Blanc.
And you were the first people to plant Chardonnay in Malta, were you not?
Yes, we were.
How many wineries are there in Malta currently?
I think there are between Malta and Gozo there are about seven or eight. Sort of more serious ones. And there are obviously plenty of little smaller operators that have a small license to produce a few bottles here and there, and may go up to 15 in all.
And the last vineyard, number 5, is Wardija.
Wardia. That's right. It's that's planted with Chardonnay and a little bit of Gelosa. We use the Chardonnay for our sparkling white wine in the traditional method. For the sparkling wine, which is riddled in the pupitre just behind me. It's a single vineyard, so all the grapes come from that vineyard. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we might be the first in Europe to harvest, because we harvest in third week of July, and we're only looking there for just enough to give us 12% alcohol, not more, and we get it. And we get quite a nice acidity. I've even produced 4 years on the lease, the sparkling version of this wine. And it turned out really well.
How many different bottlings? Because 4 years on lease is quite a lot. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did that. We did that for 2014. It was, and we did one bottling because it was a small production of 400 bottles. It was the first time we were doing it, so it was more of an experiment than anything else. But it turned out pretty well. Normally we would leave them for a year and a half, not much longer. But the Chardonnay really kept itself well. And then we produce a Brut Rosé from that same vineyard with a bit of Gelosa So we, you know, as you know, French use Pinot Noir and the Italians too. And
the
we
English,
decided,
the English,
and the English. Sorry, there you go.
yeah. Don't forget Gusbourne, head of
Certainly.
champagne.
Yeah, but we obviously did our own. We got some help from a very good white wine producer from Franciacorta called Mattia Vezzola. Produces some excellent stuff. He came down to Malta. He helped our winemaker produce our first vintage, and then set us on our way after that.
So would you say that your sparkling wines are more in the Franciacorta style?
I'd say that certainly that the influence comes from there, but we, as time goes by, then obviously you try to create your own identity. So I think when it comes to the rosé, we've got our own identity because we were looking to produce something different. So we tried to get to marry fruit, the fresh fruit of a rosé, together with, you know, some good structure of a typical sparkling wine made in traditional method. So I think we managed to achieve that. We wanted our sparkling rosé to actually have the character of a rosé.
Does anyone else make sparkling wine on the island?
Not in the traditional method or in the méthode Charmant. The only other sparkling wines that are made are the Frizzante style.
So could your sparkling wine might be unique in the world to be made out of Geusa?
Definitely, there isn't anybody else. That's for sure.
That'd be really fun to do blind tasting. Say, you know, to give people, what's this, and they'll have no idea.
They have no idea, for sure.
I'd like to see a map of the island show where your estates are. So Gozo is the other island. Why is it
Gozo? It's actually in Maltese. It's called Audesh. So it's had a number of names over the years. Audesh. So Ghawdex. But it's had, yeah. So and then there's a little island next to Gozo called Comino, which is where the cumin seed is meant to. It grows quite popularly over there, so it's why it's called Comino. It's because of the cumin seed. And then
do a lot of people live on Comino, or is it just?
I think there are about 3 people who live on Comino. It's a rather lonely place to be, but it's beautiful and a lot of rock, but lovely little bays to go by boat. It's got a lot of character.
And what's the distance between those islands? I can't see on the map.
Well, I can tell you because I've swam from Gozo to Malta, and a challenge I took a few years ago. So it's about 6 kilometers.
Excellent.
That's something I know.
Now, is there another map? I'm not sure what's following this. So this here we can see your 5 estate. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh yeah, 1 down at the bottom, 5. And where are you sitting right now?
So I would be sitting.
Cheval Franc, right?
I am in the mid. I'm not in the vineyards because I'm at the winery, and I'm right on the harbor. So just where the letter M is, you can see a harbor there, and then right inside there. Yeah, you can see a harbor right next to it with the color beige.
So your winery is away from any of your vineyards, and
it's away from all of them, but Malta is so small that I think I'm 10 minutes to our biggest vineyard. So it's a bit of a village. It's an island because it's so small that it's not too difficult to get around. But we are still planning to build our small winery. We're just waiting for everything to be approved, and we plan to build it within 2 years.
On this map, would you be under the V of Valletta, or where are you actually there?
I would be under the V of Valletta, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd be actually very close to where Viking comes into, actually.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. Literally, if I had a boat, I would actually get there in about 5 minutes.
So when people arrive on the ship, can they come and visit you?
Sure, yes, of course. We've already started to organize that together with the team at Viking. So
Fantastic.
certainly being planned for to welcome as many Viking guests and give them very special treatment.
So, there's the ship coming into the port.
Because Malta has the most wonderful. Yeah, well, I get to see a part of that, not the mouth of the harbor, but I'm further in, so
Okay.
that goes in quite far, but it's not too far.
I don't want to bore people, but there are some wine geeks who watch this show, and so can you just very quickly explain the DOK, the IGT, and the boutique wines classifications that you have in Italy?
Sure. In Malta, we have the IGT is basically represents the difference between IGT and DOC is that IGT, you can produce a wine from grape sourced from Malta and Gozo, blend them together and then create a wine. And if the grapes come from Gozo and Malta and you're creating one wine from it, the wine gets classified as IGT. For you to have a DOC Gozo, the grapes have got to come from Gozo. But you have DOC Malta, they must only come from Malta. The other differentiating factor is that the production volumes for an IGT wine are higher. So hectoliters per hectare go up by about 15 to 20% on how much you're allowed to produce from each hectare. So those are the main factors that contribute. Then you've got boutique wines. The boutique wines are basically a reflection of the special mentions that there are in the DOC protocol. So if you wanted to have a méthode traditionnelle, you need to respect the minimum sugar levels, the minimum alcohol levels, the minimum sort of aging process. If you wanted to have a passito, a sweet red, we call it a passit in Malta, you would need to obviously then have a minimum sugar, minimum alcohol levels of that you respect. The aging potential also needs to be a minimum as well of 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. And then the same applies to reserva. So if the word reserva is used, you need to keep the wine in oak for a minimum of 12 months and another 12 months in bottle as well. So you've got that a longer aging period before the wine is released. And then you've got minimum alcohol levels, which are higher. So you've got all these are very much based on the European model. So they tend to protect it. Then you've got another one, which we created ourselves in Malta. It's called the Addet ta Malta, which is unpronounceable for most people. But it's basically, it is a wine which is similar to what is made in the Veneto for the Amarone and for Passitos, whereby we dry the grapes in the sun after harvest and we get this sort of concentration. And the Addet ta Malta is basically for wines that are made in that way. Addet means drying in Maltese, and there is this protocol to protect the special mention on a label that if you do go down that process and you do want to produce an Addet ta Malta, you have to respect the protocol.
And you joined the EU in 2004, so presumably that's when the rules started coming into play?
Yeah, 2004 is when we joined, and we were advised to create a protocol. It's something that we wanted very much as a winery, so we joined forces with the farmers and a couple of other wineries, and all together wrote this protocol, presented it to government. Government obviously went through it. It was sent to Brussels and it was approved in 2007. So we've had it for just over 14 years now. So it was an important step for the wine sector in Malta to have a structure to it.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Yeah. Let's go back to the Knights of Malta.
Yeah. Okay.
So 15 30 they arrived. I think I'm going to plan to be in Malta in the year 30. You're probably going to have amazing celebrations, I imagine.
Yeah, a big. I'm sure there'll be something going on then. Yes, there's that is the Valette, Jean de Valette, who was the Valletta. The capital was named after him because he laid the first stones and planned and designed Malta.
Was he what's known as the Grand Maître?
He was the Grand Master at the time, the Grand Maître.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the most influential.
What's this we're looking at now?
That is his coat. That's a coat of arms which every Grand Master had. And in fact, because we have had 28 of them actually in Malta that ruled Malta. 28 Grand Masters, from the first to the last.
So it's a lifetime appointment, or is it?
Yeah, it is. I believe it is. Many of them tended to sort of pass away. They didn't live a very long time. As far as I can, from what I know, that was a lifetime appointment. Some of them stayed on for longer than others. Some of them less so, unless they stepped down due to age or any other reason.
So in 1998, you made your first vintage of, how do you say it, Era Oregorio Carrera?
The Grand Maître you're mentioning?
The Grand Maître wine. So 1998, you made your first one after. What happens once you've made one for each 28 and you've run out of?
Well, we haven't planned for that quite yet because we still have a few to go. But it's certainly going to be sort of either we'll just end the series and make a second edition, or we'll see. But there's plenty of ideas being thrown across the table. We've got a few to go, thankfully, but it's certainly one of those things that gets spoken about quite frequently. It's very, very popular in Malta. We don't make much of it. It's 3,000 or 4,000 bottles a year, but it's a limited edition wine, and it's done. It has a symbolic.
As a matter of interest, what does it sell for? What price? Sell it for?
In Malta, we sell it for, I think it's 40 euros a bottle, ex-seller. So, yeah.
That metal label is it's literally metal, is it?
Yes, it's made out of pewter. It's made in France by these artisan label pewter producers, and the shape of the bottle is actually taken from the design. It was made for us based on the bottle shapes that were used by the knights in those days. It was designed for us, inspired from the bottle shape used in those days. It has the coat. It has the Maltese cross on it as well on the front. Oh, it has a few interesting aspects to the wine to sort of like give it its authenticity. To carry the story through of what we're trying to do.
Have you been keeping a library collection of them so that you can taste them years to come?
Yes, we have. We have from the first to the last. we have them all.
Fantastic.
We will produce them in magnums and Jeroboams as well. So which helps with the aging.
Question: what is Primus Imcadade de Malta?
That's the one I was referring to before, the unpronounceable word, which is Imcadade Malta, which is where Primus is Gelosa with Shiraz. So Primus, there we are. It's what we do is that we, after harvest of Gelosa and Shiraz, we dry the Gelosa in the sun on the roof of the winery, and we dry the Shiraz in a room. So in a well-ventilated room, and basically what we're doing there is that we're concentrating the grape naturally with sun and wind to give us further concentration of fruit.
But it's not a sweet wine, is it?
No, it's fermented dry. It goes up to about 15%. It's fairly full-bodied, but it is a wine which I'm personally very proud of because it was I was inspired by a few wines that I had tried from Veneto in the late 2008, 2006, 2007, and we did our first vintage in 2009. So we've been producing it for a while, but we had some very interesting results with the Gelosa. Gelosa needs to be dried in the sun because the skins are very thin, so it's a very sensitive skin. And if it's dried inside the rooms, the humidity, if there's any problems with humidity, it tends to rot very easily. So it needs to be kept dry and outdoors. Whereas the Shiraz has a thicker skin, and it can be dried inside. So we found out through trial and error, but it was an important experience to go through. And we get a nice character of a Gelosa, which is our own indigenous variety, which we managed to extract more and interesting character from a wine through natural methods to try as much as possible and get to retain character and show the character of the variety, which incidentally tends to have this strong aromas of Amarena cherries, which people often identify with that as a variety. And then you've got the Shiraz, which gives it an even bigger kick on the body and rounds it off, I would say, a bit more. And together, I think they work really well.
And those aged in French oak, right?
We actually use a bit of French and American as well. So we use both. Yeah, we use both. Okay. We've tried both. We found that the American helps as well because of its power. So
now I know that you make organic wines. Are all of your wines organic?
We have one wine. We are the only organic wine producers in Malta. We have one wine from one vineyard in Maltese, which was the first vineyard we were discussing, and we have one wine there which is Cabernet based, Cabernet with Merlot and Cabernet Franc, and it's
what is that
particular. It's called Maltese, and yeah, and it's organic, so it's the only wine so far. We intend to produce more as we go along, but Malta tends to do things a bit later than everybody else, so we're certainly proud to be the only producers of it in Malta.
And then your Passito wine is traditional dried on straw, or?
So what we do again there is that we make two different types. We make a Passito from Shiraz, which is dried in rooms, ventilated rooms, for about 4 weeks, and then we get. I have to say the Shiraz really works really well for that process, for the sweet, and then we also make a white, which is from Zibibbo. So we do, and it does very well here in Malta. It's a typical Mediterranean type of practice, as is done in Pantelleria, not too far away from us, which produce plenty of Zibibbo, and we do so over here in Malta as well.
That's wonderful. What is that? That picture is.
This is where I am at the moment. So that's
right.
Anger. You're all alone.
I think we have a picture of your La Valette. Oh, there's your.
These are our barrels.
Barrels,
so, yeah.
Now we have some more pictures coming up of bottles. La Valette cab, I think.
Yes, probably there is a photo of the first Cabernets we produced. That's Maltese. That's the one we were talking about before, the organic wine.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So that's it. And this is the wine that you were mentioning. This is the La Valette Cabernet Sauvignon 1974.
74. That was your first vintage, 74, wasn't it?
That was our first vintage, yes. That was our first vintage.
Does the label still look like that, or is it evolved?
It's evolved. It's evolved over the years. And I
kind of love that old label. That looks wonderful.
I love it too, in fact. And it has a very particular paper to it as well. So,
and then you have a superior. This is the Chardonnay from Gozo.
That's right. It's a barrel fermented Chardonnay. Only 50% of the wine, though, so it's not entirely barrel fermented.
And what's that? That's the
That's the Merlot-based wine that we get from Maltese, the other estate. It's predominantly Merlot. So we have 2 wines from that vineyard that's called Antonine as well.
Those are sparkling wines.
That's our sparkling, the Brut. This is the Brut, the Blanc de Blanc.
Yeah.
It's entirely Chardonnay. And this is our Rosé. This is our,
why do you call it 101?
It was something that we were starting in our 101st year. We had just celebrated our 100th anniversary, and we said we're going to do something in our 101st year for something which is going to last for a long time. So we said in our 101st year we produce a new wine, and it was just symbolic for that.
And then your family is very much into the arts, and you're doing an artist series. Is that correct?
We have, yes. This is another set of wines we produce. My background prior to coming to join the winery and went to university, I used to go to art college in the UK. In fact, I did most of my schooling in the UK. And this is an edition of a wine which I came up with in 2004. Been doing an artist series since then. So we get we sort of commission a Maltese artist, and we've been doing so since then to produce a range of paintings for these wines. And they're based on the Maltese indigenous varieties. So that's a Maltese winery with Maltese artists with the Maltese indigenous variety. And we have this story going on there.
You have quite a few of them. How many have you done so far?
I've done it. I've got since 2004. So we've done 17 editions so far.
Wow, fantastic.
So we've got a nice collection of just over, we've been doing the Rosé for 2 years, so about 39 labels, 40 labels, something like 40 paintings. So they're calling for an exhibition.
Now we have a ton of yeah, absolutely. You should do that. Do you own the label? Do you own the artwork that you?
Yes, I have them all. Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Maybe.
Now we have a lot of questions, so I think we should get to this before we run out of time. And I'll read them, and some of them you'll answer. I guess some of them I might answer. Let me just do this. Right, so I'm going to go from the oldest up to the newest. With the drought in California and other Western states, can we expect these wines to become more expensive in the near future? Are the drought conditions currently in Malta?
I'd say that from year to year, we do get sort of these drought conditions. So we have to be more specific. Looking at rainfall this year, we had something like just under 300 millimeters of rain. We had those same conditions back in 2016 as well. So we've had varies. It varies. Some years we have drought conditions. Some years we have, 500 millimeters of rain, which isn't bad. It depends. Certainly, I don't think the problem is necessarily looking forward, being the rainfall. Because the rainfall comes and goes, certainly it is a problem, but it's not the worst issue.
Yeah.
But I think what's more worrying perhaps is farming, whether the locals continue farming, which is a bit of a problem throughout the Mediterranean and small islands where you have their children not carrying on the traditions of the father, and I've seen this in Greece and in other islands.
Yeah, so no, this is a problem.
It's a problem that we have an average age of a farmer of 55 years old in Malta, so it can be concerning.
Well, thank you, Linda, for your question about that. But it also begs the question: how are you being affected by global warming? How is that changing you?
Difficult to say. I'd say that possibly some years, what I've noticed that they will have more erratic conditions. The problem of the rainfall, we're not sure if it's related directly to global warming, because Malta is so small that it's difficult to say whether it is exactly because of global warming. Our surface area as an island is tiny, and we're covered with sea around us. My father used to say that we used to have these problems with rainfalls even when he was a kid, so he remembers this pattern already, seeing low levels of rainfall. It's not any hotter than it used to be. I can tell you that. As a kid, I remember it being even going up to 35, 40 degrees in the summer. We haven't had those conditions. So it's not hotter in Malta. Whereas other countries in Germany, for example, I've seen their climate get hotter. In Hungary, it's hotter. Malta, not the case.
Okay. Brian, Brian in Portland says, in Canada says, do you export your two native varietals? And what other varietals are showing best in Malta for production and export? I think I can answer the fact that, do you sell to the Canadian market? I don't think you do, but Cheers, the traveling sommelier who calls himself a traveling sommelier. So which wines would be the most suitable for export?
Certainly, I would say that what's most interesting, I think, as a wine consumer, who I drink obviously wines from all over the world as well, are the indigenous varieties, because it's something unique that Malta has to offer. So certainly, I think the artist edition is a very good portrayal of what Malta can produce. And then you've also got the Primus as well, which is a full-bodied red, symbolic of sort of the best that the winery has to offer in terms of its indigenous red, Gelosa. And then obviously it all very much depends on what works in which country and what people are looking for. I certainly tend to start off with saying this: the indigenous varieties is what's unique about us. We should be looking at those, because you can find Cabernets from most corners of the world, so it's not that different.
So now we have, this is Casey in San Luis Obispo in the United States. Greetings, Jeremy from California. Thank you for being on Bartholomew's show. Can you explain about the terroir from where your grapes originate? Hillsides, direction, temperature, humidity, facing winds, soil, etc. Now, some of this have been answered already, so you don't need to re-answer what you've already answered in this show. If there's something else you'd like to add about that.
Well, what I can say is that in terms of soil, we have a bit of a mix. We have Terra Rossa, which is a red soil, and then we have parts of the island which have a mix of clay and sand, and then which actually produce some pretty interesting grapes. And then there are some areas which are very dense, very calcareous as well. So you've got a mix around the island, but there is quite a nice difference in the wines when you compare them to the Terra Rossa to the more calcareous type of soils. There's a nice difference over there. Malta's quite windy, so you tend to find wind hitting most sides of the island. Being an island itself, it's very exposed frequently to wind. It helps to dry off the vines, keep them free of any sort of disease or sort of powdery mildew or anything like that, which comes along in the summer. And that the terroir varies as well in the areas where we have valleys. So we're quite hilly as Malta, so you can see it in the
alluvial styles.
You can there's a lot of hills, so you tend to have these nice pockets of cold temperature in the bottom of these valleys, which is typical of valleys, and those microclimates tend to help your vineyard in any country around the world, but in Malta in particular, we need those. We use the little characteristics of the island, being that we've got relatively low altitudes. The valleys are very important for protection from the sun, and also to getting the colder temperature at night and keeping it down at the bottom of the valley. We have a few vineyards like that.
Excellent, thank you. Other grapes, this is from Stephen in Parkville, Maryland, and I think we've sort of answered some of this, but are the grapes indigenous to Malta or imported, and do you export any grape varietals? Now, I know that we've covered the two indigenous grapes, but are they actually indigenous, or were they brought in by Phoenicians, or who brought them there?
There is talk that they came in the times of the Romans, but in our view, that they are indigenous, simply because the Girgentina, for example, is harvested at the end of September. whereas we harvest Chardonnay in the end of July, beginning of August. Chenin Blanc, mid-August. There's no other white variety in Malta that can withstand and still produce higher acidity than other white variety. So there is talk that the Romans brought it and planted it in an area called Girgenti, but it's been there for such a long time that I don't think there's anything actually documented that says it was brought by the Romans and they did that, but it was certainly found there first. But the talk is that it was possibly bought by the Romans. However, we haven't seen other varieties which are like them anywhere else. So there is a bit of similarity in taste within Solia and Sicily, but still quite different. Harvesting dates are different. Alcohol, sugar levels are different. Acidity is higher than in Girgentina, even though it's harvested later. So I believe that they're very indigenous to Malta, and there's nothing to think that they wouldn't be, in my opinion.
I'm wondering if Jancis Robinson, when she did her book about grapes, whether she did the DNA of your two native varietals or not sure.
I don't know about that. No, I don't know if she did.
Now here's a question from our beloved Karine. Everyone who is familiar with Viking knows Karine Hagen. She says, could you tell Jeremy that while I was on board the Viking Star a few weeks ago in Valletta, I had a glass of one of his red wines. It was delicious. I can well understand that most of the production is consumed domestically. I can't wait to be back in Malta and hopefully visit the winery and enjoy another glass of his wines. Perhaps if we are fortunate, his father can teach us how to cook his famous squid. Ooh, I want to be on that one too.
Yes, I remember we had an interesting session with her father. We tasted a bit of wine, the Cabernet Franc, incidentally, and we had some octopus together, and it left its mark. It's one of those things.
Was it the sort of big tentacle octopus?
Not that big. It's more the more sort of the smaller type that you find. My father has a way of cooking it that he takes it out of hot water and puts it into cold water and does it about 10 times. And it takes about 6 hours to make.
Fantastic. A little bit of garlic, maybe?
I think garlic, a lot of capers and a bit of olives and dried tomatoes. Appetizing.
Sounds fun. I'm sure Karine will be there before me, but I will be there one day, hopefully. Susan from Cambridge in the United Kingdom wants to know where your wines are available to buy. Do you generally sell them locally or Malta? Are they imported internationally? But basically, we know they're not in America. Can you buy them in England anywhere? Do you have an importer there?
We do have somebody that was buying them until the COVID broke out and the whole Brexit thing broke out as well. Probably be starting again soon. Once the restaurants and everything are back up and running. So the small importer certainly can get any details across.
Do you remember his name?
I don't have it at hand. It at hand. But I can certainly get it across if needed.
Nico from Covington, LA. Question for Jeremy. What's your favorite type of wine?
Wow, ask me every day of the week that question and I'll give you a different answer. Well, I drink wine according to moods. So out of our own, I'm drinking out of the 1919s recently because I'm very happy with what we've made. But then obviously there's so much good wine all over the world. So you certainly can't be a wine lover and just and be a wine producer and only drink your own. So I drink a lot of Maltese wine, a lot of Portuguese wine, which I'm very keen on.
What's your favorite Portuguese wine?
Well, I'm good friends with a winery called Quinta de Portal.
Oh yeah, I know them.
Yeah, good. And they're very good friends of ours. So
okay,
I go there a bit and visit them. They're lovely people.
They are lovely. I'm Corey Northford. I think we've already answered this. What is the growing soil like in Malta? I hope you listened. You can scroll back if you've missed that answer. Patrick Joseph, who asks a question which actually may be of interest to some of us. I'm hoping to come back to Malta in the next year or two and would love to try your wines, tour a vineyard or several, possibly rent a villa or vacation home for 2 weeks. Where would you recommend we look, or how do we go about this idea? Thank you so much for your presentation as well.
I'd recommend you rent a villa in Gozo. What I would tell you to do is come to Malta, stay for 2 or 3 nights in Valletta in a boutique hotel, then head off to Gozo, take a villa for about 10 days. So you have your 2 weeks filled up that way. A few days in Valletta, you get to drive around Malta a bit, visit Valletta, there's a lot to see, and go to Mdina, head off to Gozo, spend 10 days in a villa over there. Plenty of villas that can be found on the net, even through booking.com. And they're all very sort of charming, close to the sea. It's a tiny island, so you can't really go wrong there.
Excellent. That's a very helpful answer. I love that answer. Thank you. Carly Haddam, I'm quite a novice when it comes to wines. Where do you recommend I start to learn about the different types and the food that they complement? Are there any books that you recommend? I'm going to answer this because really the Wine Spirit Education Trust is the most important place to learn about wine. They have very basic courses for people who are just interested in the beginning, and they go all the way up to the diploma, and that prepares you for the Master of Wine exam. So, but having said that, there are 2 books. Probably the most important one, which I'm going to show you for starting to taste wines and things, is really my father's book, Wine Tasting by Michael Broadbent. That is the go-to book for learning how to taste wine and things like that. And then I also like the World Wine Atlas by Hugh Johnson and Jancis Robinson. Those are the 2 books I would suggest you pick up immediately. But WSET, if you want to learn, that's the place to go. Mossi San Clemente asks, do you work with any local chefs to create new wine flavors to complement their recipes? Interesting. Good idea.
We've done all sorts of things with restaurants and chefs. We had a Michelin 2-star from Italy come down and organize events when, some particular menus put together. Certainly not creating wines for new foods, but more so doing what is mostly done, matching our wines to particular dishes which are created purposely for the wine. So sometimes I like to make the wine make the food the slave of the wine, not the other way around. And then generally when I go out to eat, I tend to decide what wine I'm going to drink, then I decide what I'm going to eat after. So that's how I go about it.
That's exactly it. When I was growing up at home, my father would tell my mother what we're going to drink, and then she would have to cook a menu around that. It wasn't the other way around.
Hey, there you go. That's a good
Emily in New York asked, do you allow visitors at your winery, which we know you do, but can people just walk up to it, or do they have to have appointments?
We do have walk-ins. We're open every day of the week, and then even on short notice. But if you'd like to sort of have something more private to ensure that you are alone, if you're just a group of 6 or 7 people and you want the cellar to yourself, a booking in advance tends to help. Sometimes we have already bookings coming in, and generally try not to disappoint. But if somebody wants to have the cellar to themselves, and it's better if you book, obviously.
Great. Jonathan in San Diego, it's a fun question. With such a long family history of winemaking, you must have known from a young age that you would be involved in the business. What are your earliest memories, and when did you taste your first glass of wine?
Contrary to my father, I didn't start drinking wine till I was about 21. My father started to drink wine when he was 5 years old. He was in a convent in a boarding school. His father used to bring him a small bottle of wine every week, and the nuns used to give it to him to drink. It wasn't what he was hoping for. I think he'd prefer a chocolate bar at that age. But just to make sure that they got the good taste of it, they started off pretty young. I started off a bit later. I did a lot of my education in the UK, and I left when I was 11 and came back when I was 25. So I didn't spend a lot of time in Malta. But then when I left school and went to university in France for a short while, I had some lovely experience in Bordeaux for about 6 months, and it was what converted me. And
were you at a boarding school in England?
Yes, I was. I was in a school called Dowie Abbey, which was just outside Reading, a Benedictine monk school, and until I was 19. Then I went to art college, followed by university, and then a nice stage in France. And
which university did you go to?
I was at the University of Bournemouth in the UK, and then in École de Supérieure de Commerce in La Rochelle.
And the art college?
I was at Farnham, the Surrey Institute of Art and Design.
Right. Well, I was tell you, I was drinking wine every day from the age of 7 when I was at home. But it's interesting, in England, the legal age to give wine is 5. So your father was not doing anything illegal by drinking wine. So Mika from Montclair, we love seeing Mika commenting on these. How does Jeremy rotate those thousands of bottles in his cellar, and how often does he have to do this? Every day, week, month, question mark. It's called riddling, Mika. It's called riddling. How do you riddle them? Who riddles them and how often?
Well, it depends on when we want to sort of like disgorge. So it happens in different phases throughout the year. We do have a team of operators that work in the winery that do this job for us, and they come down and do a session for about 4 weeks, and in different stages. There is a manual of how you go about it, turning it in thirds at a certain degree, and it's done in different stages over a 4-week period until it's turned completely vertical, ready to be disgorged, and actually going through the machine which we have, which freezes that little bit of champagne, dead yeast, and this little plastic piece of plastic attached to the crown cap, which gets removed in this machine, which has a freezing agent to freeze that block of ice.
Very much the same way it's done in good sparkling wine production like Gusbourne in England or Champagne in France.
Yeah.
So Casey, we've already answered, do they export to US? No, sorry, they don't currently. Have to see if that can be changed. Carola and Bill, the step up in the United States, what does the term BRICS means? That very interesting interview, as we in the US do not know very much about Malta Vineyards. Great interview. BRICS, can you explain the BRICS, the sugar content in must? When if you pick a wine at 15 BRICS, it's going to be very underripe. If you pick it at 25 BRICS, it's going to be pretty ripe. You want to just tell a little bit about BRICS, not too much.
Yeah. Basically, at different levels of the harvesting stage, you take a little grape and you put it in something called a refractometer, which measures the Brix level, which is basically the Brix level measures the sweetness in the grape, and it tells you how ripe the grape is and at what point of its maturity it's arrived at, and that will give you an indication whether you have reached ripeness, when you should cut, whether you should do it straight away, you should wait a bit longer. And that indication, you should have a target level of Brix in your mind, though the Brix should not be the only target, because you can have a high Brix and then you can lose acidity. So it's one unit measurement which you use to determine the maturity of the grapes and the cutting date of your grapes.
Great. Yeah. Phenolic ripeness is something which winemakers talk about, and some people wait till their grapes are phenolically ripe, which means that the seed is brown inside. But some of the great winemakers that I know, like Jack Newport, say that if your seeds are brown, then it's overripe, and phenolic ripeness isn't always the best thing.
Yeah, that's right.
So Dean in Tiverton, I think this is my friend Dean Medeiros, but I'm not 100% sure, but judging by his question, I'm thinking it is. Are the Marsovin Cabernet Franc wines heavier or lighter than the wines of Chinon in the Loire?
I don't think that they are as necessarily as heavy, the ones that we put, but we make different styles. As I mentioned before, they're medium bodied, because we're not getting very high alcohols, but we're looking for varietal characteristic to get out from the wine. So we're looking for maturity without concentrating unnecessarily. I think that, from my experience, they're not as full bodied as those.
Yeah, so maybe more like Bava in Italy, Bava's wines, or maybe a little bit less full-bodied than Barbersville in Virginia, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then Casey asks, how bell peppery is your Cabernet Franc? Is it very bell peppery?
You can literally you can smell it, and you don't even have to be trained in wine tasting. It's some years I think it's beautiful. We don't always get it at the same level, so it's not one of those things that you'd like to, but nature dictates that.
Right.
But when it's really present, I really like that aroma. It's something which excites me. So when it comes, it's great.
Oh, Casey thanks you. He says he's learned a lot. Dr. Stephanie from Pasadena, I'm just curious about the main language used in Malta. I think we've talked about this a bit, but maybe some of these wineries' locations have Arabic names, Ramla and Wardeh. Am I wrong in assuming that the way you pronounce them sounded like Arabic first, once one Ramla referring to sandy soil and second relating to flowers? That's a very intellectual question.
Yes, the most of the regions around the island are Arabic origin as names, except for Valletta, which is named after the Grandmaster in the Valette. And there are some other places which are named after Grandmasters too. But most of them are of Arabic influence. But the Brit English is as widely spoken as Maltese, so it's an official language of Malta. The British rule gave us the English language, which is actually one of the best things that they gave us, and thankfully it is one of our mother tongues as well. Closely followed to that, but not as much as Italian. So there's a lot of Italian spoken here, but nowhere near as much as English is.
Perfect. Now, all we have to do now is taste the wine. And now we're going to close today's talk. I want to thank everyone very much for listening. And Jeremy, thank you. I can't wait to meet you in person, hopefully off a Viking ship coming to your winery. And
That would be great.
thank you so much for being with Viking.TV today. Very appropriately, we're going to end today's conversation by showing a video of the Viking ship sailing into port, and also a few other scenes from Malta. But I do want to thank you so much for this wonderful episode of Wine Wednesdays on Viking.TV, and hopefully we'll get your wine into the US and back into England, and I'm sure some of these people, I know Mika for sure is going to book a cruise and come and visit you in Malta. So thank you. If you'd like to.
Sure, that would be great. First of all, thank you for hosting me on this show. It's been great, and been very happy to introduce Malta and Marsovin at the same time, and our family history, which is, our own story, to tell a bit of it to people halfway across the world, so to speak. It's also obviously very nice for us to share. Obviously, the cellars are open, as I mentioned, every day, so certainly more than happy to welcome everybody there. And look forward to hosting you, Bartholomew, as well, when you come to Malta.
Thank you.
Please do come and see us.
Thank you.
Here most of the time. So it'll be great to taste some wines together and get your feedback, of course. And well, the next thing, as you said, is to taste the wine. So we'll look forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.